Kuali Lanesik. Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Desert. I'm Sarita Gonzales, your worship associate today, and I just greeted you in the language of my ancestors, the Mexica, who called this land Semanawak, the land between the oceans, and the indigenous people from the northern part of this continent called Turtle Island. As we begin, we acknowledge that we are on the historic homelands of various bands of the Cahuilla people. We honor the unique relationship that we hope emerges between our community and the indigenous people and their traditional territories. Let this acknowledgement serve as a reminder to recognize, honor, reconcile, and partner with the Cahuilla people whose land and water we benefit from today. Before we begin, I also want to let you know that it doesn't matter where you or your ancestors are from, who you love, your gender identity, your theology, politics, or immigration status. We welcome all those who are committed to our core values as expressed in our 7 principles. Together, we come to this place to share our hopes, dreams, and visions. We seek to build a diverse community, an inclusive community that honors our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every being. Thank you for being with us this morning. If you are watching this service online, welcome. Please consider making a donation with our virtual offering basket. Your contribution is an important way to support UUCOD. Those who are, Those of you who are watching online, just click on the link provided on our weekly constant contact order of worship that you receive, or at the end of the service today through an email link that will be sent to you. If you are here in the room, we will be taking a collection later in the service, and we welcome you to make an offering then. If you would like to be on our email list to learn more about us and our programming, please contact us at admin@uucod.org. That's admin@uucod.org. And I have a couple of special announcements this morning. First of all, we are suspending coffee hour because I think it's maybe a little dangerous for us to be breathing all that silica that's blowing around in the patio. Another special announcement comes from S2S2S. Script to Stage to Screen announces its final show of this season, I'm Not Rick Springfield, by Vicky Vaudry. A hilarious blend of hero worship, family dysfunction, and mistaken identity. It will show Friday and Saturday nights, May 20th and 21st at 7:30 here at the church. Tickets are only $10, the best deal in the valley. Reservations are required. Church COVID precautions are followed. Everyone must be masked. And maxed too, that wouldn't hurt. And now we will ring our Tibetan bowl to begin our service, and then listening to our music for centering.
Thank you for that, Malcolm. I want to point out that today's, all of Malcolm's music, and actually our hymns, are all written by women today in honor of the day. Good morning. I am Reverend Ian Riddell, and I have the honor of serving this congregation as its minister. However you found us, however many times you've been here with us in person or online, welcome. We are a congregation and a tradition that celebrates the richness and beauty of individual lives and commits to working together to weave a tapestry made stronger and more vibrant by our collaboration and by the sharing of our lives and our visions for a thriving future for all life. We are called together in worship as a beloved community. We are called to set aside distractions and anxieties that we might touch deeper springs and be renewed. We are called to seek and to share comfort for the hurts that afflict. We are called to desire more love, more justice, and life more abundant. We are called to truth, to mercy, to humility, and to courage. Let us answer these calls with the yes of our lives. Let us worship together.
And now, if you will recite along with us as we light our chalice. May love be the spirit of this church. May the quest for truth be its sacrament, and service be its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, and to help one another in fellowship. This is our aspiration. And now if my partner Barbara will come up and help me light the BioPOC candles. And you may recite after me. I think the words are up. Let me turn the page. We light this candle in solidarity with Black, Indigenous, and other people of color as we journey toward spiritual wholeness. May we, as a beloved community, work to dismantle racism and all forms of oppression. May we live out our principles so that justice, dignity, and equity for all prevail.
Now, I have an old favorite story to share with you all today. It's called The Paper Bag Princess, and it's written by Robert Munsch, who is a Canadian children's book author. Elizabeth was a beautiful princess. She lived in a castle and had expensive princess clothes. She was going to marry a prince named Ronald. Unfortunately, a dragon smashed her castle, burned all of her clothes with his fiery breath, and carried off Prince Ronald. Elizabeth decided to chase the dragon and get Ronald back. She looked everywhere for something to wear, but the only thing that she could find that was not burnt was a paper bag. Go figure. So she put on the paper bag and she followed the dragon. He was easy to follow because, like all dragons, he left a trail of burnt forests and horses' bones. Finally, Elizabeth came to a cave with a large door that had a huge knocker on it. She took hold of the knocker and banged on the door. The dragon stuck his nose out of the door and said, "Well, a princess. I love to eat princesses, but I have already eaten a whole castle today. I'm very busy, dragon. Come back tomorrow." He slammed the door so fast Elizabeth almost got her nose caught. Now Elizabeth grabbed the knocker and banged on the door again. The dragon stuck his nose out of the door and said, "Go away. I love to eat princesses, but I have already eaten a whole castle today. I am a very busy dragon. Come back tomorrow." "Wait!" shouted Elizabeth. "Is it true that you are the smartest and fiercest dragon in the world?" Yes, said the dragon. And is it true, said Elizabeth, that you can burn up 10 forests with your fiery breath? Oh, yes, said the dragon, and he took a huge deep breath and breathed out so much fire he burnt up 50 forests. Fantastic, said Elizabeth. And the dragon took another breath and breathed out so much fire he burnt up 100 forests. Magnificent, said Elizabeth. And the dragon took another huge breath. But this time, nothing came out. The dragon didn't even have enough fire left to cook a meatball. Elizabeth said, Dragon, is it true that you can fly around the world in just 10 seconds? Why, yes, said the dragon, and he jumped up and flew all the way around the world in just 10 seconds. He was very tired when he got back, but Elizabeth shouted, Fantastic! Do it again. And so the dragon jumped up and flew around the world in just 20 seconds. When he got back, he was too tired to talk, and he lay down and went straight to sleep. Elizabeth whispered very softly, Hey, dragon! The dragon didn't move at all. She lifted up the dragon's ear, put her head right inside, and shouted as loud as she could, Hey, dragon! The dragon was so tired he didn't even move. Elizabeth walked right over the dragon and opened the door to the cage, and there was Prince Ronald. He looked at her, and he said, Elizabeth, you are a mess. You smell like ashes, your hair is all tangled, and you're wearing a dirty old paper bag. Come back when you're dressed like a real princess. Ronald, said Elizabeth, your clothes are really pretty, and your hair is very neat. You look like a real prince, but you are a bum. And they didn't get married after all. That's our story for today. I invite you now to just take a deep breath, to remain seated in your seats, and to sing sing along with your masks on, please, as we sing our meditation hymns, Spirit of Life and Fuente de Amor. We're just going to sing. Here we go. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me in Espanol. Fuente de amor, ven hacia mí, y al corazón cántale tu compasión. Soplar, volar, sube en la mar, hasta moldear la justicia de la vida. Arráyame, libérame, fuente de amor, ven a mí, ven a mí.
Did I break it? Okay. Thank you, Reverend Ian. I sing so much better when you lead. And before I start my reflection, I want to call out my 5 sisters who are all mothers by choice and wish them happy Mother's Day today, along with my mom and my grandmothers who are no longer with us in this sphere. Many times there are people who influence us in very exceptional ways. And I had one such Wonder Woman who was a tremendous influence on me. Her name was Miss Opal Meadows. She was my 8th grade math teacher. She was an amazing person, a Wonder Woman to me. She was tall, sexy, well-dressed, wore nice heels every day, and was very attractive based on the dated norms of the mid-1960s. She also drove a beautiful vintage silver Porsche. What a wonderful machine. Many of my classmate boys spread rumors that she was an ex-Playboy bunny. That's how attractive she was. I took notice of her attractiveness because as a budding young lesbian, she was my first crush. But that's not all that I remember about her. She was an excellent math teacher who inspired me to excel. Like many girls in public schools back then, we struggled with math, not because we didn't have a mind for it, but because of the low expectations that were held for us in this subject. I need to tell you a little bit about what public schools were like in the 1960s. Public school segregation was outlawed in California in 1949 with the Mendez versus Westminster case, and nationally in 1954 with the Brown versus Topeka Board of Education case that was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. But even in the mid-1960s, I was educated in a school district that remained segregated. Some administrators and teachers found ways to keep students apart on the basis of ethnicity and race. I still lived in a segregated neighborhood called Eden Gardens in North San Diego County, which was where all the Mexican families lived. In school, we were tracked according to our abilities, and of course, the Mexican children were assumed to be of lesser abilities. They were assigned to teachers who gave them easy work and didn't expect too much of them. Another thing about me in junior high school was I was a total geek. I lived in a fantasy world, and I was one of the few kids that actually enjoyed big band music and science fiction. I felt out of step. I lived inside my head because that was the one place I had control of my world. In 8th grade, I was placed in a lower level math class taught by Mrs. Meadows, even though my standardized testing indicated that I had an aptitude for math. She told me I belonged in a more challenging class, so she advocated for a schedule change. She made me feel very smart, and she also made me feel less weird. More importantly, she paid attention to me and made me feel special. Though through her encouragement, I learned that I could do anything that I set my mind to do. And I even got a couple of rides home in her wonderful silver Porsche. I succeeded as evidenced by good grades and attendance. She often told me how proud she was of me and would encourage other Mexican kids to take more challenging classes. She even told my younger sibling that he could succeed too, like his brilliant sister, Sarah. She was one of the few teachers who inspired me to pursue a career in education. I still remember this woman fondly. Yes, she was attractive, and she spent much time on her appearance, but she also learned her subject matter well, and she had honed her teaching practice. She also became a fighter for equity and justice, always advocating for her students. Yes, she was my 8th grade math teacher, but she was also my inspiration, and she was my first crush. A few years ago, I found out that she had passed away of old age and had remained a highly respected math teacher until she retired. Mrs. Meadows, my Wonder Woman, who drove a silver Porsche. forgot my most important job. The ushers will come forward and take the offering bowls and collect the offering.
These are the gifts of generosity which you have given to the life and thriving of this community. We are grateful for your generosity, for your care, and for all that you, all of you, bring to the life of this community. Thank you. These are the joys and sorrows of our community on this day in May. We light a candle for women everywhere whose rights to control their own bodies are being challenged. For Sister Ginger, who died 3 years ago this month, we think of you so often. A candle for Archie and Diana to say that we are thinking of you and sending you healing thoughts. Evan lights a candle for his mom, who gave him life and has saved it multiple times. Love you forever. Linda lights a candle for one of her sisters and brother who will have surgery soon. Happy birthday, Michael Pagliano. Bryna shares a candle every day of every year since I was born. She says, I have been grateful, but never more so than this year to the young woman who chose to carry her pregnancy to term that made her a mother. Wherever she is, made Bryna a mother, Wherever she is, she says, I bless her. I light a candle with these words from our Unitarian Universalist side with love, people. Our Unitarian Universalist faith affirms that all of our bodies are sacred, and that we are each endowed with the twin gifts of agency and conscience. Each of us should have the power to decide what does and doesn't happen to our bodies at every moment of our lives, because consent and bodily autonomy are holy. And when disparities in resources or freedoms make it more difficult for certain groups of people to exercise autonomy over their own bodies, our faith compels us to take liberatory action. These are the joys and sorrows that have been shared with us, and we know that there are more in the quiet of our hearts. And so I invite you now to join me in a moment of prayer and meditation, comfortable in your seat. Take a deep breath. Spirit of life, fire of love, source of all that is, today we hold in our hearts especially all those who have been mothers to us, whether they gave birth to us or held our hand while we learned to walk, or taught us how to change a tire, or throw a baseball, or learn math, or held us in their arms as we wept and then cleaned our wounds. We are grateful for all of those who have mothered us and challenged us and demanded that we be our best selves as we walk through the world. And we also acknowledge that we did not all have loving relationships with our mothers. We hold in our hearts today all those for whom this is a painful day, those who've lost their mother through death or estrangement, those whose relationship with their mother was or is painful or abusive, those who have been denied the opportunity to be a mother by biology or bigotry, those whose experience of being a mother has been painful or challenging, those who have lost their children. May you know that we will sit with you, we will stand by you, we will walk with you. Spirit of life, we hold in our hearts with honor and gratitude all those who do the work of nurturing us into new being, who teach us to be resilient in the face of the challenges of our lives, who nurture and guide the world into new possibilities. May we live up to the best that we can to their model and their love. And we remind ourselves on this day, especially this day that was imagined originally as a day demanding, in the face of the violence and death of the Civil War, that the voices, experience, and wisdom of women, of mothers, be heard and honored. On this day, we remind ourselves that our commitment to the understanding that each of us has agency over our own bodies, that we are each gifted and challenged with the right and the ability to decide how we will live in and use our bodies in the world, that our commitment to this understanding and our commitment to justice, equity, compassion, and the thriving of life means that we know that motherhood should be a choice today and always, a choice made intentionally with freedom and understanding. And we know that we are called to do the work of protecting that choice. All of this we hold in our hearts as we pause now in quiet love in this room made holy by our gathering here today. May all beings know peace. May all beings know an end to suffering. May all beings know love. May it be so. So, I'm going to talk about Wonder Woman today. And I want to start by talking a little bit about why I sometimes choose things like television shows and science fiction books and comic books to preach about, to be inspired by. You know, I really wish there was a picture of Wonder Woman up on the screen there, but copyright means that we can't quite do that. There are two bits of comic book culture that have been in the news for a while. These aren't brand new, but you may or may not know of them. You might have heard of one of them if you watch The View or any of the big network morning shows. A few years ago, Thor, the god of thunder in the Marvel Universe and one of the main members of the Avengers in the Marvel Universe, was temporarily rebooted as a woman. Jane Foster became Thor. Now, the comic book world is notoriously touchy when big changes are made to established characters. Some applaud the change, some deride it as window dressing, and some cry foul when they feel like their characters are changed. And in fact, actually, there's a new Thor movie coming out soon, and if you've seen the trailer, you'll see there's a female Thor in the mix. And so this conversation is happening again with a very mixed reaction. And the same is true in many movie franchises. You may have been lucky to avoid hearing the scorn and derision that was aimed at the Ghostbusters remake a few years ago, a reimagining of the concept with all female leads. It's hard to reconcile the financial and critical success of that movie, and of Wonder Woman, actually, and of Black Panther all in the same year, with the vitriolic, misogynist hatred aimed at it, usually by people who hadn't seen the movie. And we could see this as a bunch of squabbling among some geeks with very little impact in the real world, but I don't think that we can. I think it actually matters what happens in popular media, because when little girls can see that the god of thunder can be a woman, when they see that a brilliant scientist and a buster of ghosts can be a woman, it breaks open possibilities and offers hope. When children hear stories where the princess does the rescuing and does it by outsmarting rather than slaying the dragon, what possibilities open up? The actress Gina Davis was interviewed once about her very short-lived show Commander-in-Chief, on which she played the President of the United States. She was asked how important it was really to have a female president on a fictional television show. She replied by asking the interviewer to think what the world might look like to the little girl who just saw for the first time that she could be president. Popular culture matters, representation matters, and we should take it seriously, which means that along with not just dismissing it as silly, we can't just enjoy it without thinking about it. We need to ask questions of it and ourselves. We need to be critical. We should be critical. What do Mad Men and Severed show us about corporate culture and how we treat people who work in our offices? What do The Walking Dead and Station 11 show us about how we might respond to pandemics, especially as we live through one? What does Doctor Who tell us about who gets to be in control as the Doctor whisks unsuspecting humans off across space and time, interfering with and tweaking history as they go? What do Downton Abbey and Bridgerton and The Gilded Age really teach us about class beyond loving the fantastic clothes? What do Game of Thrones or The Expanse or Battlestar Galactica teach us about the role of women in government and power? And so I want to talk a little bit today about Wonder Woman, partly because I love her and want to share that love a little, but especially today on a day we pay attention to mothers, at a time we are facing painful, destructive, and cruel attacks on the rights and integrity of women. I think she might have something to say and some inspiration to bring. I have to share with you, I'm a little sad today. One of the comic book artists and creators who had a huge impact on the life and work of Wonder Woman, George Perez, in the 80s, passed away yesterday. And so there's a little sadness for many of us who love Wonder Woman today. So what is it about Wonder Woman that makes her so fascinating, so argued about, so powerful a symbol? And why is her creation so fascinating and deeply relevant to our lives today? Well, her story, the story inside the comic books, begins in the mists of time. There was an island inhabited by only women, the immortal Amazons, who left man's world, and I use man's world, that's the language that was used, man's world behind after being abused and imprisoned by Hercules. They freed themselves and pleaded to the goddesses to give them a new home away from violence and the abuse of man's world. And so their gods sent them to Themyscira, Paradise Island. Their queen was Hippolyta, and their princess, her daughter, Diana. No man had set foot on the island for untold thousands of years until on one fateful day, a single plane crashed on their island. Its pilot was Captain Steve Trevor, and he was badly injured. With much curiosity and not a little bit of fear, the Amazons healed Captain Trevor. Queen Hippolyta, because of this, decided it was time to send an ambassador to man's world on a mission to save mankind from its violent and destructive ways. And so a contest was devised to choose the strongest and most suitable Amazon to lead this mission. Now, Diana knew her mother wouldn't approve, but she disguised herself and entered the contest. She had, it seems, fallen in love with Steve Trevor during his short time on the island and wanted to be the one to accompany him back to man's world. She, of course, won the contest, and Hippolyta reluctantly sent her to take Captain Trevor home and help the denizens of man's world to save themselves. And so Princess Diana traveled to man's world under the identity of Wonder Woman. This is the story that began 81 years ago in 1941. First told in the pages of All-Star Comics number 8, the origin and adventures of Wonder Woman eventually moved to Star Spangled Comics, and then also in a comic series simply titled Wonder Woman, which has been in print since then, one of the only comic books to be constantly in print. Part of the reason for that is that if it goes out of print, DC Comics loses the copyright. But anyway, it's always been in print since then. William Moulton Marston was a psychologist who had been hired as an educational consultant by the comic company that eventually published Wonder Woman. Inspired by both his wife Elizabeth and their romantic partner Olive to create a female superhero who would, quote, triumph not with fist or firepower, but with love, Marston and artist Harry Peter created Wonder Woman, Princess Diana of Paradise Island. Along with that familiar white-starred blue bottoms that were originally a skirt and the golden tiara, Wonder Woman wore bracelets, worn by all the Amazons to remind them of their former captivity, bracelets which deflected bullets and energy blasts. She also carries what we've come to know as the lasso of truth. Marston originally intended that the lasso would force anyone trapped by it to submit to Wonder Woman's will. But as the stories went along, eventually the lasso's power shifted to forcing the captive to tell only and all of the truth. Given this, it is interesting to note that Marston's non-comics work was key in the development of the polygraph, the lie detector. The man who invented Wonder Woman invented the lie detector. It's also interesting to note that Marston's own non-traditional sexuality and relationship models played out often and clearly in Wonder Woman's early adventures. More than just interesting and important, as a woman among a mostly male fraternity of superheroes, Wonder Woman's early stories had truly progressive, some would say transgressive, ethical stances on women's role in the world and in relationships. Marston said that Wonder Woman is a psychological propaganda for the new type of woman who should, I believe, rule the world. He made no bones about it, and his stories reflected these ideas. Women were superior, he said, because they were able to harness the power of love and emotions as strengths, because they were more honest, more reliable, and more efficient. Not in these days the most progressive understanding, but in 1941, pretty amazing. Wonder Woman's origins, though, grow out of more than just the fancies of his mind. Historian Jill Lepore wrote a powerful history of Wonder Woman's creation and early years in her book, The Secret History of Wonder Woman, in which she delves into the letters and records of Marston and his two partners. I highly recommend her book. It's called The Secret History of Wonder Woman. Lepore is a historian of renown, and it's a really wonderful book, and not just if you love Wonder Woman. In the introduction, she writes this, and this is a longish quote. Wonder Woman is no ordinary comic book superhero. Her story is at the center of the histories of science, law, and politics. Superman owes a debt to science fiction, Batman to the hard-boiled detective. Wonder Woman's debt is to the fictional feminist utopia and to the struggle for women's rights. Her origins lie in William Moulton Marston's past and in the lives of the women he loved. They created Wonder Woman too. Wonder Woman is no ordinary comic book character because Marston was no ordinary man, and his family was no ordinary family. He was a polymath. He was an expert in deception. He invented the lie detector test. He led a secret life. He had 4 children by 2 women, and they all lived together under one roof. Marston was a scholar, a professor, and a scientist. Wonder Woman began on a college campus, in a lecture hall, and in a laboratory. Marston was a lawyer and a filmmaker. Wonder Woman began in a courthouse and a movie theater. The women Marston loved were suffragettes, feminists, and birth control advocates. Wonder Woman began in a protest march, a bedroom, and a birth control clinic. Margaret Sanger, one of the most influential feminists of the 20th century, was part of Marston's family. Wonder Woman has been fighting for women's rights for a very long time. That's the end of the quote. The edginess and progressive stories didn't really outlast Marston's control of the comics, though. After his death, Wonder Woman's adventures began to look more and more like other superheroes' tales and began to reflect gender attitudes of the day, with occasional bright moments. Interestingly, the change in stories also went along with a change in sales, a drastic drop. Since Marston's time, the sales of Wonder Woman comics have always been less than those of Batman and Superman. Since Marston's time, the comic book depictions of Wonder Woman have ranged from progressive to deeply offensive. Sometimes she's an ambassador, sometimes a change agent, sometimes a basic powerhouse superhero, a female Superman. Sometimes she's a defender of women, sometimes of all of the weak and downtrodden. Sometimes she's an environmentalist, sometimes she's a sex symbol, sometimes she's a member of the pantheon of Greek mythology. All superheroes go through varieties of images and personas as they pass through time. It would be impossible for characters created in the 1930s and 1940s as Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman were to stay the same, to stay static. All 3 of these heroes, for example, spent a great deal of time in the early 1940s, not just as symbols of universal justice and truth, but as active participants in the Second World War, defending the interests of the United States primarily, and fighting lots and lots of Nazi and Japanese soldiers and leaders. But I will warn you, if you hunt down some of the comics for the 1940s, and they're digitally available now, be ready for some despicably racist portrayals of African American, Japanese, Chinese, and Italian characters. Comics do still struggle with real issues of race and gender and sexuality, but those early stories are really, really difficult to take. And we see the character of Wonder Woman living with a myriad of expectations within the stories themselves. Other characters often don't know what to do with her, how to treat her, what to expect from her. Sometimes this is a strength, sometimes it's just annoying. But the character, over her 80-plus year history, also has to deal with expectations from readers and consumers from outside the story. She has been paid attention to by feminists, you can imagine, all of her life. An example is in the 1970s, because every once in a while you have to stir these characters up and make them more interesting after they've been around for a long time. Her powers were all taken away, and she fought crime in a white pantsuit that made her look like Emma Peel from the Avengers. And this, if you can find online, you can find Gloria Steinem's response to this depowering of Wonder Woman was quite negative. The costume is a huge piece of conversation. No superhero costume has taken up more ink, digital or otherwise, than Wonder Woman's costume. When the movie was announced, is it right? Is it too revealing? Her costume has been a constant source. And she has been written by men and by women, though many fewer women until recently, by gay men and straight men, by younger folks and older folks, lifelong comic book fans, and novelists just dipping their toes into a new and growing world of comic books. And changes every single time. So what is it, then, that keeps her alive in our culture and in many of our hearts? What is it that runs through all of this change and upheaval that keeps Wonder Woman powerful and resonant? My answer today is call. That still small voice, or a loud, demanding voice that demands that we do this because it is what will save us and the world. Ministers talk a lot about having a call to ministry, that thing that is the core of why we choose to do what we do. Many heroes have calls, not all of them by a long shot, but many. Both Batman and Spider-Man, for example, are shaped and driven by the death of family members to commit themselves to ridding the world of that kind of crime. For me, Wonder Woman's call, the thing that grounds her inside and outside of her comic book world, is a call to be a champion of truth and steadfast faithfulness and of hope. These things carry her through adventures and defeats, poor sales and momentary popularity, good writers and bad, crisis and relationship. She is called forward by her commitment to these things. It is true she has been sent on a mission by her mother, change their minds and change the world, as the theme song for her 70s TV show goes. But in her heart is the call to truth and hope and loyalty. Keep faith, Wonder Woman says in a powerful moment written by one of my favorite writers, Gail Simone. Keep faith, trust to love, fight with honor, but fight to win. Those words are really powerful these days. Keep faith, trust to love, fight with honor, but fight to win. Linda Carter, who played Wonder Woman in the 1970s television show, once said, "She's not your average superhero. It's not so much about her superpowers as it is about her ethic. I always thought of her," she said, "as a figure who stands for what's right. We all know what's wrong with the world today, so maybe we need her right now." Let me tell you the story of another woman, though. A real, living, historical person this time. A woman who heard a call to service and answered despite the risks to her own life. Born right at the end of the 19th century, this woman lived until 1980 and really wasn't known very well until after she died. Her name was Rose Valland, and she was an art historian. Now, along with their systematic destruction of the Jews and other outcasts of Europe, along with their goal of conquering all of Europe, Hitler's Nazis set about systematically looting the art and riches of all of the people and places they invaded. Paintings and sculpture and architecture were destroyed or stolen, warehoused in museums in conquered cities, or adorning the mansions of Nazi leaders. One of these museums was the Jeu de Paume Museum in Paris. It became a central storage and sorting place for the looted artwork of occupied France. In 1941, there's that year again, Valland began to work at this museum. As an art historian, she became quickly aware of what the Germans were doing, and so began quietly and secretly, very much at risk of her life, to work against them. Now, Valland had kept secret from her Nazi superiors that she spoke German. Knowing what they were saying without them knowing that she knew was invaluable to her task. She knew she couldn't stop the looting, but she knew that she could record what the Nazis were doing, keep track of the art, where it came from and where it was going. As art came in, she secretly recorded what arrived. As art went out, she secretly recorded what went where. And then she passed this information on to the French resistance. Especially important was to pass on to the resistance which cars on which trains were carrying precious and irreplaceable art, so that the resistance could avoid bombing those cars. It's art, it's just art, not people, of course, you might say. But the Nazi plan was not just destruction of people, but the eradication of entire cultures that they deemed inferior. Our art carries our culture in so many profound ways. Its protection was crucial to the rebuilding of Europe. And that's just what Valland's work helped to do. Her lists and notes meant that after the war, art could be returned to where and to whom it belonged. She was instrumental in restoring the culture of Europe after the war. We think often about this, but remember also that we're in a period now where countries, non-European countries, are reaching out, well, reaching out is a kind way to say it, are demanding that the items and the culture that has been looted from their countries be returned. The British Museum is in constant, is constantly being talked to by the Egyptians to demand the return of their cultural artifacts, for example. Now, not many knew about Valande and her call to save culture, though she received numerous governmental awards from the French, the Americans, and eventually even the Germans. She is known now as part of the group that's nicknamed the Monuments Men and appeared in the movie of that title, played by Cate Blanchett. She was called to preserve the culture of her country in the face of Nazi nihilism, greed, and destruction. Called, I dare to imagine, by hope and truth and faithfulness to her culture. We all hear calls in our life, in our hearts, and our minds. It's a call that may not be as overwhelming as Princess Diana's or as world and culture saving as Rose Valande's, but we are each called in the world to be in the world in a way that is true to our nature, true to our relationships, and true to the love that sustains and enlivens us. We can feel pulled in so many directions by the expectations of our culture, of our family, or the needs of the world. We can feel pulled in many directions by our own instincts and desires and needs. Like Diana, we can be challenged by having too many calls to answer while remaining whole, and we don't have the benefit of being a fictional character. The real world is calling us these days. War, pandemic, and the intentional erosion of the rights of so many crowd the news and our hearts. There is a lot calling us to respond here and now. But we can take the time, make the effort to listen and to see what is truly calling us and how the world truly needs us. See and hear, as Frederick Buechner wrote, where our deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. And then perhaps we can, like Rose Valande, make a difference that might seem small, but which could just maybe save a whole world. May it be so. I invite you now to rise in body or in spirit as we sing our closing hymn, Rising Green, number 1068. Words and music for this hymn are by Carolyn McDade, who also wrote Spirit of Life. If you don't know it very well, you can listen to those of us who do know it sing the first verse and then join in on the second and third. Please rise in body or in spirit. My blood doth rise in the roots of yon oak. Her sap doth run in my veins. Boundless my soul, like the open sky, where the stars forever have lain. Where the stars forever have lain. My hands hold the weaving of time without end. My sight as deep as the sea. Beating my heart sounds the echoes of old, that of love's eternity. That of love, that of love, that of love's eternity. I feel the tides as they answer the moon, rushing on our far-distant sand. Winging my song is the wind of my breast, and my love blows over the land. And my love, and my love, and my love blows over the land. old into new. Our dreaming shows us the way. Wondrous our faith settles deep in the earth, rising green to bring a new day. Rising green, rising green, rising green to bring a new day.
Before we extinguish the chalice, Randy Steele asked me to remind you of something, but I forgot what to remind you of. Oh, yes, it's socks on the 2nd. So if you brought socks, please drop them off at the bin at the front of the church. And also the Finance Committee is meeting right after the service in the community room. So if you're a new member or an old member and want to join the Finance Committee or thinking about it, please join us right after the service. So let us recite our extinguishing as we extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
A couple of things about next week. Next week's Sunday service is Ask Your Minister Anything. And I've invited you to ask me questions, which I will answer in the service. So you can send me questions through the survey that you'll find in the newsletter. You can put them on a piece of paper in my mailbox in the office or send me an email. Make sure you say questions for the service and not just every day. But I will do my best to answer all the questions that you ask. Silly and impertinent and important, all of the bunch. I did this in my congregation in Las Vegas, and one of the kids asked me what I liked on my pizza, and that was the most controversial answer I gave. I also want to remind you that next week is our annual meeting, and at that meeting, along with electing officers and passing our annual budgets, we will be voting on whether or not our congregation will adopt the 8th principle. I hope you've had time to explore the 8th principle over the past months through reading and conversations and small group gatherings. Please take some time this week to think deeply about this. We are being called to do new things and to imagine new possibilities. So I hope you'll join in our meeting next week. We will have the meeting here in person and on Zoom, and then the voting for all of the things that we're voting on will happen through an online vote, which you'll get a link for. Everybody is welcome to the meeting, either here or on Zoom, but only current members may vote on things that we vote on. So please, that'll be at 11:30 following the service next week, both here and on Zoom. Please do come. Gail Simone, I told you a little bit about her earlier. One of my favorite Wonder Woman writers had her speak these words, and I want to use these as my benediction for us this morning. I beg of you, have faith in more than fear. If just for a moment, have faith in my dream of peace, faith that all the darkness and sorrow will one day be gone, faith that fear isn't all there is in the world. Please take my hand. I give it to you as a gesture of friendship and love and of faith freely given. I give you my hand and I welcome you into my dream. Go in peace, my friends, to love and serve that dream of the world.